What's up, guys? My name is Part-Time Gamer Dad. Welcome to the channel. Just want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much for all of the positive energy and love that you guys have been sending my way in terms of the welcome video we did last week, the thank you video that we released yesterday as of recording of this video. If you haven't seen that thank you video, go check it out. It's got my twin newborns voices in it, showing their disapproval of me not snuggling them at that particular 2-minute interval of their life. But it's just been an amazing experience so far. We're almost at 250 subscribers as of recording of this video. We're only about 10 away, so if you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. It gets us a lot more traction and visibility in the algorithm, which on YouTube, as you know, can be kind of make or break. And then on top of that, we also have a TikTok and an Instagram. We've already started posting on Instagram. We're going to be doing some TikTok stuff this week as well. And probably the cadence of the channel is going to be about one video like this a week. And then maybe 2 to 4 TikToks a week. For those of you who don't know, I'm a full-time worker in my job. And we have a teenager, and we have 2 newborn twins, and I have 2 dogs. And I have a wife, and all of those things in my life need attending to. And so I'm a part-time gamer dad, but that doesn't mean we can't have fun and talk about a lot of things we love about video games. Goal of this channel, in case you want to know, is just to build a community where we can talk about games in the very limited time that we have, and also give each other recommendations, because we have such limited time that maybe we could get some good insight and advice on what to play and not waste our money and time on garbage games, which I know we've all been privy to probably at one point in our lives. Ride to Hell Retribution is still one of the biggest disappointments of my life. So, but you're not here for a welcome video, you're not here for a thank you video, you're here for Resident Evil. This is Resident Evil Games ranked video. This isn't going to be the entire series, this is just going to be the numbered entries. So it's going to be 0 through 8 in anticipation of Resident Evil 4 Remake dropping later this month. Now you might see back there, I've got Chris, a statue of Chris from the Resident Evil 8 Village Collector's Edition. I have a spot right next to him, like right here, where we're going to have Leon and his statue put up, because we do have the Resident Evil 4 Remake Collector's Edition on pre-order coming, and on release day, hopefully it delivers that day, I'm going to be doing a TikTok with the unboxing. So make sure, like I said, go check out the TikTok. We're going to be doing some really cool stuff over there. But let's get started on these guys. Now, all of these games I played between May 2021 to September of 2021 for the first time. I had never played a Resident Evil game properly before. I'd watched plenty of videos. I may have dabbled here and there back when I was a kid playing at my friend's house, but I wasn't really allowed to play M-rated games growing up. And so except for God of War, which I think on the down low, like my parents didn't know. So Resident Evil just never made its way into our house. So it took me a long time to really get attached to it in the way that I am now, which I'm a very big fan. But I think we can all agree that at the very bottom of the list in terms of the numbered games of 0 through 8 is...
You're not funny and nobody likes you.
No, of course, it's not Resident Evil 4. I'm not crazy. It's actually Resident Evil 6. And I think I've never met anybody who actually likes this game. I had very high hopes for Resident Evil 6. In playing so many Resident Evil games for the first time so quickly between like May and I think when I finished this one, it was like in July at some point. I felt like this game was such a disappointment. It had 2 of my favorite characters from the whole series, and Chris and Leon, and you get to play their stories, right, their chapters. And then you had Wesker's son, Jake, which if this is new information to you that Albert Wesker had a son, you should leave this video right now. There's going to be a lot of spoilers. But I look at the campaigns of each of them, because it's broken out in 3 separate campaigns, right? Each one maybe roughly like 6 to 10 hours. I would say overall this game took me about 25 hours to complete. I dug around in the little nooks and crannies. And I would say this is the exact kind of like ranking I gave it at the time, right? So Leon's was pretty okay. His campaign was pretty okay, verging on good. Chris's was okay. There were some things about it that I didn't quite like, but I really liked Pierce. I think that he was a really good companion character. And then Jake's campaign was, if I'm being unbiased and just really transparent anyway, I thought it was trash. I thought it was just grade A garbage. And so when you kind of average those all out, I give it a 5 out of 10. I wouldn't go out of your way to play this game if you really care about canonically, like, what the story is as a whole. And you're somebody who just has to play every Resident Evil game, like I'm finding myself to be. I would play this one, but don't feel like you have to just because you want to know the full story of the game. You can go onto YouTube, you can look up information about the story of this game, and it will take you a small fraction of the time than you would spend wasting your life playing this game. All right, next up we've got this is the Origins collection, and I'm not actually rating both games right now. I'm just going to be rating Resident Evil 0, which comes in at 8th place. Resident Evil 0, I feel, had a lot of interesting ideas in terms of like clicking off of one character into another character. Some of the frustration about that, though, was how do you pass some of the inventory space. And I think the inventory is kind of I learned really quick in that this was my first Resident Evil game I ever played, that it's always evolving, it's always changing, and I thought they tried some interesting things in here. I thought the narrative was okay. I didn't think it was anything to write home about. I think in terms of like setting the stage for Resident Evil 1 properly, it does give some very needed backstory. I think that it produces a lot of answers to questions that might have been left out in terms of the overall narrative of Resident Evil 1. But in terms of, again, a game that you need to go out of your way to play, I don't think this is it. I gave Resident Evil 0 a 6.5 out of 10. A significant step up above Resident Evil 6, because if we're looking at just the overall rating scale of Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 5 is a dumpster fire. Resident Evil 0, though, is a solid game with really good ambitions. You also got to remember it was released a really long time ago, so when we're comparing this against some of the other games, it doesn't have some of the hindsight ability that more recent games have had. So for what it was able to accomplish at the time, very significant, solid game. I think a good entry point for me to kind of just understand how some of the mechanics works, especially when we're doing a fixed camera setting, like we would also do in some other titles that we'll get to soon. But Resident Evil 0, don't feel like you have to go out of your way to play it. Again, it's kind of a companion, I would call it a companion game to the first Resident Evil, that you could just go watch a video on, get the lore, get the backstory, but not something that you necessarily need to go out of your way to play. In 7th place, we have Resident Evil 5. Now, we're really going to start getting into a series of games that are all kind of in the same realm, right? Like, I feel like Resident Evil titles are pretty solid as a whole. Like, as a series, it's one of the better overall series in terms of quality. If I were to throw, like, Revelations and Revelations 2 in here as well, they would be kind of floating in this, like, mid-tier as well, just because there's so many solid games. And I feel like 7 Up, for me, I'm going to tell you right now, those are games you should go play. They're games that I feel like are quality, are time well spent. But I feel like of all the games that are time well spent, I think Resident Evil 5 comes up the shortest. When I first played this, I was enamored with it. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I loved Resident Evil 5. I thought that Resident Evil 4, which we'll get to later, I thought that it was better innovation-wise in terms of the things it did, but I thought that like Resident Evil 5 was more well-polished. I thought that gameplay was tighter. I thought the showdown at the end, it was epic, it was climactic in spite of boulder punching. I thought that the game as a whole was just really fun, and I love Chris. What I didn't love was some of like the inventory system. AI companion Shiva, she was really frustrating. But I appreciate how much it's scaled back in terms of enemy encounters, because I think that was one of my biggest gripes with Resident Evil 4, which kind of spoilers, we'll get to that soon, but like the enemy encounters of Resident Evil 4 were so repetitive, and I felt like in Resident Evil 5 they got innovative with it, which was really nice. So again, you don't necessarily have to go out of your way, but if I'm going to start getting into like what games you should play, Resident Evil 5 is definitely up there. Solid 7 out of 10, and it comes in at 7th place. Now, I've got a confession to make, and please don't get upset, but Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil 3, I have not played the original releases, the original games, and how they were intended to be received. I have not played them in that way.
Move this man!
I have played the remakes, and so coming in at number 6 is Resident Evil 3 Remake. Now, this game, actually, I played it whenever I was, I just had a surgery, and so I was kind of stuck on the couch all day, and I actually beat it, if I remember correctly, I think I beat it in a day, because it's so short, and it was really interesting, because I just played Resident Evil 2, and so there was a lot of, again, the remake, so there was a lot of similarities that I noticed between, like, locations, because these had just come out a year apart from each other, so I noticed a lot of connections between the two games, which is really cool because it's kind of running alongside Resident Evil 2, right? So that was really fun. What I didn't find as fun or engaging were the characters. And I think that just really comes down to how short the game was, the lack of fleshing out, if you will, of the story. It wasn't there for me. Also, Nemesis is supposed to be this really significant character, and maybe if I go back and play the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis at some point, I'll find him to be more compelling and more fun to play against, and just a better villain. But I had just come off of Resident Evil 2 Remake, right? So Mr. X to me was always more threatening and imposing and looming, right? Like, that was kind of the beauty of Mr. X, which I guess I'm kind of like already doing a Resident Evil 2 review, but I'll get to more of that later. Mr. X was fun because you weren't sure where he was. And you could kind of strategize around him. You couldn't do that with Nemesis. He was annoying, and I did not enjoy Nemesis in terms of the game. Now, the boss fights, fine, but in terms of just the way he was integrated into the story in just random parts of the game, was not as fun. That being said, at the time I played it, gave it 8 out of 10. I was on some meds at the time, so I'm going to knock it down to an appropriate rating, which I think is 7.5 out of 10. Great graphics, great gameplay. I think it was just really lacking in terms of overall presentation, overall story, overall development, but still a solid game to add to the collection and play. So then in 5th place, right in the middle of the pack, we have the Resident Evil Remake. So the OG, just the remake version, which I think is an incredible game. At the time I played it, I was a little intimidated. I'd always been intimidated by Resident Evil games, which is why it took me so long to get there, on top of not being allowed to play it when I was younger. And I think that I maybe didn't give it as fair of a chance as I should have in the beginning, right? In the first hour I played it, I didn't like it, actually. I thought I didn't like the mansion setting. I didn't like the characters. I found the voice acting humorous at best. But then I realized that's kind of the charm of the game. The game came out almost 30 years ago at this point. So there's a lot of real charm and heart to the game. And as I started to understand that, and as I got deeper into the game, and as I got to know the characters better, and as I got to understand the story better, and I had just come off of Zero, I really fell in love with it. I thought the tank combat mechanics that I started to learn about in Zero were much better in 1. I thought that they presented a more of a fair fight against enemies than Zero did. I thought that like sound design and the music and the art design and direction of the game were just all fabulous. I think my biggest thing was that it just didn't feel as overall captivating as some of these other games that are going to come on the list as well. You gotta understand, this is 8 out of 10 to me. This is a solid game, really solid game. Again, a lot of the things that other games were able to do that were developed later, which, if we're just being honest, like 2, 4, 8, and 7. That's not in order, by the way. That's just how my brain just malfunctioned all of a sudden. Those games just had more of an opportunity to do things a little bit differently based on when they were released and the opportunities they had. In terms of like a foundational game to build off of, like Resident Evil 1 is such a quality game, and I'm a big horror game fan. I love Silent Hill. Silent Hill is probably it's in my top 5 game series of all time, but now Resident Evil is as well, and a lot of it has to do with me falling in love with this game. and then what that led to in terms of falling in love with 2 and 3 and then 4 and then even 5, which a lot of people were always surprised about. Like, I actually, even though I rated it a 7 out of 10, 5 to me, I'll probably replay it at some point in my life. And then obviously 7, 8, and I'm excited for 4. I played both Revelations games. I'm going to play Code Veronica. Like, that wouldn't have happened if I didn't get to this game, because I knew that Zero was technically a pre-sequel. I knew that it came out after 1. I knew that it was a prequel, and that it wasn't necessarily tied into the full complexity of the original game, and I knew I needed to get to this one to really understand it all. So, great title, great starting point for the series. If you're gonna start anywhere, don't start with 0. Start with 1. I think 0 will just leave you with a little bit of hesitation in terms of continuing the series. 1 is where it's at. Chris, I'm just gonna say, Chris is my favorite character of the whole series. I played this with my daughter watching, my teenage daughter. She was 11 at the time when it came out, because it was right before her birthday. So she and I just found it really funny, the voice acting really funny, but we love Chris. Chris is our boy, which is why I have him back here. So great characters, great story, great direction of a game, and great foundation for the series as a whole. Again, 8 out of 10, middle of the pack. Check it out. Now, guys, this next game, my number 4 game, I feel like, wherever I put this game, there's going to be people that are upset. But I just had to think about how I felt about the game, and it's not going to be what the majority of you probably like to see. But number 4 for me is actually Resident Evil number 4. Now, before you come at me with pitchforks and try to cancel my very young YouTube career, hear me out. I think that Resident Evil 4, people make a lot of arguments that Resident Evil 5 is kind of the downfall of Resident Evil because it took things in a more action-focused direction. I think Resident Evil 4 is actually the perpetrator of that.
You say something so controversial yet so brave.
I feel like it took it in a more action-focused, horde mode-like direction. And I think that there were just so many enemy encounters that were unnecessary. I feel like they were trying to pad the game time, and it made it feel really bloated, and it made it feel really like a chore to get through. And I know some of you are really going to hate me for saying that, but for me, playing through the series pretty objectively, just like one game after the next, I really felt like Resident Evil 4 was not the greatest game of the series, and very much not the greatest game of all time. Now, I can see why a lot of people like it. And at the time, don't get me wrong, innovation-wise, a landmark game. And this isn't bad, right? It's number 4. And when we get to these final 4, we're talking about games that only one of them realistically could be put in the number 1 spot. So these top 4 games are games that I feel are all very valuable of being in the conversation. For me personally, though, it's an 8 out of 10. I put it on the same level as Resident Evil Remake, and I'll tell you why. I love Leon. Where Chris is number 1, I would say it's more like 1A, 1B. Leon is going to be 1B, right? Like, I only have 2 Resident Evil statues, and it's not just because of the timing of when these things came out, right? Like, I could go by a Jill thing, I could go by a Claire thing, I could go by a Barry thing, I could go by a number of things that I feel are Resident Evil relevant and things that I like. But Chris and Leon are my boys, and Leon is such a really unique and interesting character and very complex in his relationship with Ada Wong and just all of these things. I love the merchant and interacting with him and like buying rocket launchers and just like loading those bad boys up all the time. There's a lot of really cool things about this game, and I think the narrative is actually probably one of the strongest. I actually really like the story. I don't like what happens in between the story beats, though, a lot of the time. And I think that's just because I feel like I'm fighting wave after wave after wave of enemies that never quite change. And you would say, but Josh, that's the same as any Resident Evil game. And I would actually say that's not true. Look at Resident Evil 5. There's a really unique array of enemies that you're fighting at all times. Even if you look at just some of the way that the zombies interact with you in some of the other games, I feel that is more true to a variety of enemies versus Resident Evil 4. So, Resident Evil 4, great game, must play. I want to make that very clear. This is a must play game. 8 out of 10. It is just not for me in my top 3. But I do see the value of this game and the landmark it is on gaming as a whole. Whew, okay. You still here? Please still be here.
Bye-bye.
All right, so number 3 is going to be Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Now, okay, before everybody gets on my case about Resident Evil 7 over Resident Evil 4, you gotta understand, I was playing these back to back to back. And for me, like, don't get me wrong, like I said, Resident Evil 4, solid game, right? But Resident Evil 7, I felt more invested in it. I felt like I was Ethan, and I think that's the whole point of first-person perspective, right? Like, when they switched over to first-person for Resident Evil Biohazard, you can't tell me that you didn't feel more emotionally invested in what was going on in that game versus any of the others. Like, Leon, Chris, Claire, Jill, amazing characters, but they feel, especially as the series went on, it felt a little, like, unrealistic. It felt a little over the top. And Resident Evil 7, even with the spooky elements and with the gore and the horror and all that kind of stuff, like, this game legit felt very emotional to me. And I cared about Mia, and I cared about everything that Ethan was going through, and not just the physical pain, but the psychological and mental torture he was going through and trying to find his wife and trying to escape this hopeless situation. And I think that what made it really unique was, again, it didn't rely on enemy encounters to pad a game. It relied on the tension of Jack just stalking you, very similar to a Mr. X. Just, you never really quite know where he is, and then boom, you're in the bathroom, and pop, he's at the door. And that scared the crap out of me. And also with just any boss fight felt very different. I feel like for a lot of Resident Evil bosses, it's like bullet sponging, whereas these other villains and boss fights, it felt very focused on strategy related to that particular boss. So sometimes it was a bullet sponge, sometimes it was a puzzle to get out of a room that would light you on fire, right? It was just all of these different, and then at the end, it was a bullet sponge. You were shooting into a bullet sponge, but it was amazing, and it was out of the house, and it was daytime, which is so unique and so different. And I could gush about Resident Evil Biohazard forever. To me, this game, 9 out of 10. Like, to me, this is actually the game that got me interested in Resident Evil. When I first saw gameplay on this, and I think I might have even seen the trailer before I saw gameplay, like, I was instantly hooked. Like, I love horror games. I love first person. I love to get spooked. I also like to look away just because I'm in my 30s. I don't want to die because of a heart attack. But this game was so incredibly impactful on me, just getting interested in the series. And I think a lot of that had to do with it felt more real. It felt more visceral. And for some people, they can't handle this game, right? Like, and I get it. And me rating it so high, telling you, go play this game. A lot of people can't play this game. I know people who have tried. Friends of mine, and they were like, I got 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours in, and I had to stop. It's rough, it's brutal, it's very violent, it's very gory, but the story that's there is incredibly emotional, and I think that that's what makes it such a beautiful story. And so 9 out of 10, Resident Evil Biohazard. Pick it up, play it, maybe reach out to a friend, see if they have it, just in case you can't finish it, because it's got some stuff in it that's a little brutal. But I guarantee you, if you stick through it, especially through that first hour or two, man, does it get really incredible. And the story that's there, I don't want to spoil anything, but like when I got to the boat section and went to a flashback, like even that part of it was really captivating, even though it was so different, and I felt like maybe I was playing like a little bit of a Resident Evil Revelation game all of a sudden. It was such such a treat to play, and it was really well thought out. I think that was the thing that made Biohazard stand out, and I think that's kind of the beauty of Resident Evil 6, which you're probably saying to yourself, like, you gave that last place. Yeah, because it was a stinker and everybody hated it. So they had to think of a way, how can I go back? How could Capcom go back and kind of go back to the drawing board and make something great? And this is where it all started. So Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, check it out. I'm realizing I'm probably talking about this game more than any other game, but that's how much I believe in it. So check it out. Do you see I stacked the games? I stacked them real bad. Okay, so we're down to the final two, and it's kind of a toss up. If I'm being honest with you, these two games are like a quarter point off of each other. So if Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is a 9, one of them is a 9.25 and a 9.5. And the one that just barely misses it for me is actually going to be Resident Evil 8 Village. Now, guys, I mean, come on. This is the steelbook for the collector's edition that I got with the Chris statue. But there it is. There's Resident Evil Village right there. This is the last main series Resident Evil I played. So I got to September. I had played all these other games, right? And I think that what happened, I was feeling kind of emotional. Like I feel like I had just gone on this crazy journey through some of gaming's best that has to offer, especially from the survival horror genre. And the thing with Village is, I remember downloading the demo, and I was so scared. Like, so I hadn't played any of the other Resident Evil games yet, but I played the demo, and I was like, oh man, this is fun. Like, this is really fun. This is something that is scary, but like in a good way. If you've ever seen the movie Scream, like there were moments in the game, I'm thinking specifically like in the cornfield, and there's something moving, but you're not really sure where it is, or you hear something and you're not really sure where it's coming from. And for me, that created an atmosphere and aura of fear that I hadn't really experienced in many games. Like, even with 7, it was more like jump scare, right? And the atmosphere was definitely there, but like you're big open space in 8, and you're in this village and you're exploring. In 7, you're in a house, so it's always like what's around the corner. In 8 is it me? Am I psyching myself out, or is there? I don't want to spoil anything, but like, you know. Is there a monster waiting for me underneath this house as I crawl through? And whoop, there goes my finger, right? So it's a very interesting approach to the game. It felt very reminiscent of 4, which I think that was always the intention, right? It's like, let's take Ethan, let's put him in a village just like in Resident Evil 4, put it in a first-person perspective, let's turn it up a little bit in terms of gothic horror, and let's see what happens. But I think the other thing that's really important to think about from a perspective of Resident Evil 8 Village is I'm a dad. And Ethan in Resident Evil 8 is a dad. He's got Rose. The game starts, I mean, so if you don't want spoilers right now, click off. But the part in the very beginning where Chris comes out and kills Mia and takes Rose, for me, with Chris being my boy, I was like, Chris, what are you doing? That's my baby. What are you doing? That was my wife. And as a dad and as a husband, I immediately was very upset. I felt very emotionally invested. And I think that's the beauty of 7 and 8, and having this consistent protagonist that you're living through the lens of in Ethan. It made it very relatable for me, especially. So that really took me to a whole different level. And I think that's what boosted a little bit above Resident Evil Biohazard. I really feel like they're companions. Like, you have to play 7 and then you have to play 8 like immediately afterwards. And I think the people who waited, hats off to you. Like, I don't think I could have done it. 7 and 8 to me are just two of the best games I've ever played. And I think that you have to play them like immediately. Like, I couldn't stop once I started playing 7. I couldn't stop until I finished 8. Like, that's to me the transcendence of those two games together as a whole. They're a package deal. There's the DLC for Rose that I have not played yet. I've heard good things. I want to play it in VR the Resident Evil 8. I want to replay it. I've got the PSVR 2, so I want to go back and replay it after Resident Evil 4 Remake, because I just love this game so much. And I think the other thing to really think about this game are the villains. Like, I can't think of a game that has such fun villains in the Resident Evil series. You got Lady D, you've got Heisenberg, which is like a Nicolas Cage psychopath type turned up to like 20 out of 5. I always mess these names up. Beneviatu, which that was scary. Like, if you know, you know. But that I couldn't. No, I'm never. No, we're never doing that again. And then Moreau, which was fun. I think my least favorite part of the game was the Moreau section, but man, like, just the way it was structured and the pacing of the game, it was long, but it didn't feel padded, if that makes sense. Whereas Resident Evil 4 did to me, and that may not be the same as your experience, but that's why I put Resident Evil 8 Village 9.25 out of 10, second place. Go pick it up with 7, play them immediately, and then come back here and find out what number 1 is.
No, hard pass. Hard pass.
Guys, the games are, they get real bad. All right, ladies and gentlemen, number 1 should be no surprise to anyone, and I think that a lot of people would agree with this. It's Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now, like I said, I haven't played the original Resident Evil 2, and I know a lot of people love that game, so I'll have to give it a shot once I have the ability at playing a game. I know that I have like a 64 game, but guys, I literally have a 64 game. Complete in box, 164 game period. I don't even have a 64, so maybe that's what we should start working towards, is getting a 64. I want to do a series called the 64 Score. If you've ever followed Phoenix Resale, he's doing one called Mission Switch. He did a different one called GameCube Gambit. I want to do 64 Score, do 64 of the best 64 games, in my opinion, that I want to own. If you think that would be interesting, leave a like and a comment down below just in support of it, and tell me what GameCube games you'd like to see on that kind of mission. But we're getting off track. Resident Evil 2 Remake. Guys, I played this game at a time in my life where I was actually alone in this house. And I remember calling a friend over to just hang out with me while I played it. And you might think, like, what a wimp. But there's so much in this game that is legit scary. And was it as scary as 7 or 8? No, but I played this one before I played those two. So you also have to remember that these games I played at the beginning, I didn't know what to expect. 7 and 8 I did. And as I think about it, I think I downloaded this demo before I downloaded the Resident Evil Village demo. So my true first experience was with the demo of this game. And I even remember downloading the demo, now that I think about it, and it was, I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to play Resident Evil. Like, there's just no way. I don't think I could ever bring myself to play the series. And lo and behold, here we are, and it's one of my favorite video game series of all time. So Resident Evil 2, I think what makes it so good is the totality of it from a holistic view. It's the controls, right? It's the sound, it's the sound design, it's the score, it's the animation, it's the looming threat of Mr. X, and we're finally going to talk about him. When he first showed up and moved that helicopter out of the way, and I shot his little hat off, which I thought was a nice touch. I don't think I've ever been more afraid of a villain in any video game ever until I got to 7 and 8. I think that in terms of Leon and Claire, like, two of the best, if not the two best campaigns, like solo campaigns in a Resident Evil game that allows you to split campaigns to get a full story. Guys, I'm just looking at the back of this box, and like I think the cool thing about Resident Evil 2 Remake is that there's so much to it, but a lot of it really relies on you exploring, and I think that's what really separates Resident Evil 2 Remake for me from everything else. And I hate to keep comparing it to Resident Evil 4, but like Resident Evil 4 I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of value to going off the main path, like going onto the beaten path, right? And yeah, there was collectibles and stuff like that. So much of the story of Resident Evil 2 is in the little moments outside of the main story. And you could say like some of them are triggered by the main story elements, but like they're not feeding into the main narrative, right? And I could not find a moment for me that in any other Resident Evil game, with the exception of maybe Rose being kidnapped, that made me feel as emotional as in Resident Evil 2 when you come across the dad and the kid is infected and they go into the shed in the back and you know what happens. It's just so it's so impactful from a standpoint of these are real people in a real place that are experiencing real loss, real grief, and hopeless circumstances. And I think that's really what this game comes down to. It takes something that feels like a hopeless circumstance and says, Leon's going to go be a badass. He's going to go crush it. Claire's going to be a hero, and she's going to save a little girl, and she's going to help her escape a really hopeless situation. And some of the situations she has to escape from is really kind of disgusting, but at the end of the day, like it's the reality of the world that they live in, because it's the reality of the world we live in. So narratively, just like perfect. Like you couldn't ask for a better narrative. I think the one thing that stands in the way of it getting a perfect score is the lab section. The lab section for me was a little frustrating at times, like knowing where to go or knowing what to do, or even just like some of the enemy encounters felt a little much and like a little unfair. But even that, you know, it was still pretty solid. The police station section is easily the best to me section of a game of any Resident Evil. Whoa, that's my mic. Any Resident Evil title, period. Like bar none. The police station, Resident Evil 2 remake. That's it. That's top tier. Like if we were doing a tier ranking, like that's the only S tier for me. So Resident Evil 2 remake. Game of the series. And look, I'm aware a lot of people are probably leaving comments right now like, oh my god, why did you put Resident Evil 4 in fourth place, 8 out of 10? How could you not give it a 20 out of 10? I hope that Resident Evil 4 remake proves me wrong. I've been keeping up with it, and I think it looks amazing. I think a lot of things that they are adapting or changing or just slightly altering are for the better. I think there could be some things that will be missing. Guys, don't get me wrong, I like Resident Evil 4. Heck, I even kind of love Resident Evil 4. To me, it's just not the game that everybody else feels it is. So go play Resident Evil 2 Remake. Go play all the Resident Evil games. I know I said that you don't have to play 0 and you don't have to play 6. Go play, well, don't go play 6. Go play everything else, though. Everything else is worth your time. It's worth your money. It's worth the emotional investment. It took me 4 months to play through all of them. But guys, I'm a part-time gamer dad. I only do this part-time. It is worth it, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Remember to like and comment on this video. Let me know what your favorite Resident Evil game is of the series. Maybe it's not one of these games. Maybe it is Revelation. Maybe it is Revelations 2. Maybe it's Mercenaries. Maybe it's Operation Raccoon City, although if it is, you're wrong. Maybe it's a totally different title. Let me know which maybe your least favorite is. Maybe you disagree with me, and maybe Village is such a deviation from what you grew up on that you just hate it that much. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Like I said, check out our TikTok. We're going to be doing the unboxing of Resident Evil 4 Remake Collector's Edition here soon, as soon as it releases on the 24th. We also have an unboxing of WWE 2K23 coming. We're just getting whatever the mid-tier version is, because it's the highest version of physical it is, so that we can get, so it won't be much of an unboxing, but very excited for that title as well. As you can't if you can't tell, wrestling fan, WrestleMania, so get used to that as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here to end the video, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the support across all the socials, and just like making this a great first couple weeks. And I look forward to seeing you guys very soon on TikTok and here for later videos. Thanks, guys.